Hey everyone, welcome to Neil Talks. My name's Neil, and it's time to talk The Sandman. I don't think I've ever felt this way about a new show coming out before, and let me explain why. Today, I want to take a look at the trailer that was just released at San Diego Comic-Con and talk a little bit more about what we can expect in this coming show. It's interesting. I follow a bunch of other reactors as well on YouTube, and well, a number of them have reacted to this trailer. I'm getting the sense that there's not a ton of excitement for this show, and it's mostly because they don't know the property. Most of the reactors I follow are comic book nerds in the best way possible, but there's something really interesting about the Sandman, even though it's based on a great comic book that existed back in the late 80s, early 90s. I think it went from about 88 to 96, 75 issues, written by the incomparable Neil Gaiman. It was not a comic book for comic book kids. It was a comic book for people who were not into comics. And it brought a ton of people into the medium who had never explored comic books before, including myself. I wasn't a comic book nerd. I liked my superheroes, but late 80s, early 90s, comic book movies were hardly a thing. It certainly wasn't anything like it is today, where there's a wealth of comic book properties out there in television, in movies. It wasn't really my jam. But I got turned on to the Sandman, and this was not what I expected from a comic book at all. And I think that's a problem that a lot of people have with comic books, is they equate the medium, pictures and dialogue bubbles in a magazine format, with the genre, superheroes, because so much of the medium is occupied by that particular genre, but it's not exclusive. So the Sandman is not a superhero, even though this is a DC comic. This was originally on the DC main label. It ended up being one of the flagship titles when DC spun off Vertigo as its sort of adult, more mature label. But this is not about superheroes. This is about story. This is about myth and fable and creatures that are greater than gods, but it's not about fighting evil. It's about dealing with your family. And it's a literary story for all the pros and cons. But if you ask anyone, honestly, I'm not sure if you would get the same answer today, but if you asked anyone back in the mid-90s, when comics were having a real resurgence, a real boom, what the Mount Rushmore of great works of literature in the format were, you would be told Alan Moore's Watchmen, probably Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. You'd be told Sandman, and then the fourth one would be up for debate. But those three were kind of like the holy trinity of here's what comics can be. Let's talk about how much Sandman changed comics. 3 examples. Before Sandman, trade paperbacks hardly existed in the format. 8 to 10 issues of a comic book, turn them into a paperback trade edition, and market those. Sandman was the first to really run with that idea with a full run show. Sometimes it happened with little mini series before, Watchmen, for instance, Dark Knight Returns, like I mentioned, Mouse, that sort of thing. But Sandman ran with it and did it for every issue that came out. It's like, when's the next trade paperback coming out? And there's some people that never bought the comics, only bought the trade paperbacks, and they still sell well to this day, those TPBs. So it changed the industry in that sense. Here's another example. Issue, I want to say 19, A Midsummer Night's Dream, is pretty much a one-off issue that involves William Shakespeare and a performance of the play in question to the actual fairies. And it won, in the year it came out, which I'm going to say is 1990, it won the World Fantasy Award for Best Short Story. And there were so many people in the fiction industry that were upset by that they changed the rules the next year so that a comic could never again win short story. Which isn't just closing the door after the horses escaped, and I'm paraphrasing Neil Gaiman here. It's closing the door after the horses escaped and won the Kentucky Derby. So yes, there are stellar stories within the Sandman run. Finally, Neil Gaiman had a plan for Sandman. He knew he wanted to do a 75-issue run. Once they got picked up after the first year, after the first 12 issues, he had a 75-issue plan where he wanted to tell this whole story, and then he figured it was done. But the problem with comics is, if a label has a successful title, and the writer wants to leave the title, they don't stop making the comic, they find a new writer. And that's the way it's always been. Neil Gaiman didn't own the rights to Sandman, DC did. But Neil started putting it out there as he was progressing through his run that he really hoped DC would put Sandman to rest when he left, that they wouldn't continue it with a new writer. And to DC's credit, they decided to act in good faith and do exactly that. They retired Sandman when Neil Gaiman left the comic, which is unheard of. It was a really strong selling title for them. It had a ton of fans, but I think maybe they also knew that they would lose a large chunk of the fans if another writer took the title over. It was such a writer-centric title that it was probably better to go out on a high note. Nevertheless, that particular act was really unique in the industry at the time. So, especially in an era where creators didn't have rights over the properties that they create for comic labels. So yeah, it was a groundbreaking title in so many ways. And I've always been a fan. Loved it from the day I discovered it. But it's not for everybody. Let's talk more about it after we check out the trailer.
Your waking world is shaped by dreams. Dreams and nightmares that I create and which I must control.
He's out there looking for me, isn't he?
Can you imagine the damage he could do?
I need your help. If dreams disappear, then so will humanity.
I could do without dreams for a while. I haven't had a decent night's sleep in ages.
I'm not gonna stop until I've reshaped this world.
Tell us, what power of dreams you have?
Oh, I got chills. I literally have chills.
But I have a job to do, and I do
Oh,
it.
it looks so good.
Things have changed.
Oh, it looks so good.
Your eyes will tell me everything. Every thought, every feeling.
My creations do not walk amongst the living, killing mortals for pleasure.
Oh, you don't think dreams can die? Let's find out.
Oh,
Nightmares do not belong in the waking world.
Oh, it turns out I fit right in.
Dreams don't die.
Mr. Sandman.
oh, I got chills. Like, oh. I have chills. Like, whew. It looks so good. There are images in that trailer that are lifted directly from the comic books, and I love that, but I also appreciate that there's images in there that are new to me, which means they aren't being blindly loyal to the books. When it makes sense, let's use the comic books as source material, but let's not be afraid to adjust the story, here's what I know. It's set today, not in 1989. So there's some small adjustments there. Some of the characters have been adjusted. Lucienne, the librarian of the dream world, is now female. But the personality of the character, I think, will be very similar to that in the books. Death, Dream's sister, is now played by a black actress. Doesn't change the character at all. I'm totally on board for changes like that. Gwendolyn Christie is playing Lucifer. Here's the thing, guys. Lucifer's not male. He's not... I'm going to do my best with pronouns when I react to this show, but I may be flubbing things. Lucifer isn't male. They are agendered. Lucifer's a fallen angel. Angels aren't male or female. They are their own thing. They are asexual. They don't have bits. Unless you're going to actually hire an angel to play Lucifer, you're dealing with what's available to a modern production company. My point being, I like the fact that there is some reimagining of this of the context of the story, but I don't think the story itself is going to really change, which I'm excited for. What else do we know? We know that the first season of the show, 10 episodes, is going to be the first 2 trade paperbacks of the comic. So the first 16 episodes, I believe. Preludes and Nocturnes and The Doll's House. Now, I am super excited, but I am also super nervous. I am nervous. And there's a number of reasons why I'm nervous. Sandman has been in various stages of development hell since the 90s. There was often talk about turning it into a movie back then, but fans of the book knew that just wouldn't make sense. Like, how do you take a story this complex, this involved, this long, and turn it into a 2-hour movie without butchering it? And so I think most of us were secretly crossing our fingers that never happened. And we would have been content if the book never left the comic realm. So when you hear that it's going to be turned into a series, you worry. And it's not because Netflix in particular has it. In fact, the fact that television has evolved a lot in the last 15, 20 years. And there is now prestige format television where budgets are astronomical and expenses aren't spared, and the original creators are involved in the television production. And Neil Gaiman is an executive producer on this show, and I believe he's written some of the scripts, and I know he was on set for much of the filming, and he was involved. So that's encouraging, but the story itself it takes place a lot in dreams. It takes place in so many different worlds. It takes place in so many different times. It may work better in comic than on TV. It may feel disjointed. It may feel... I don't know whether it's going to translate or not. And I'm coming as a diehard fan. I'm just really hoping that it doesn't flop. And I think those of us who are fans of the comic will love it. But I don't know whether it's going to attract a new audience. I don't know whether casual Netflix people who know nothing about the property are going to try an episode and stick with it. And if they stick for a second episode, which is in episode 2 is completely a different feel from episode 1, then are they going to watch episode 3? Because in my mind, the first trade paperback, the one that tried to integrate itself the most with the existing DC universe, that established itself, it's the most horror story, I feel, of the entire run. It's the darkest. I don't know whether it's going to find an audience or not. I might be really pleasantly surprised and it may be a runaway hit. But but it might not. And it's so hard to anticipate. They've done everything they can. They've clearly put money into it. The cast looks incredible. The performances I've seen from the few clips I've seen look so strong. I just don't know whether the story itself will attract enough of an audience for the show to continue. And I feel like if we stick with the comic run, the show would get better and better and better as the seasons progress. So yeah, I'm nervous. But no matter what, I'm going to be watching it, and I really feel like I'm going to be loving it because I love the story. I love the story, and it feels like they're being faithful and respectful of the story and of the comic fans. So I feel like I'm going to be honored. I hope, I have high hopes for the show, and I don't know whether it's going to meet them or not. But like I said, the comic brought people into comics that weren't comic fans. So maybe it's going to do the same thing here. Maybe it's going to bring people who wouldn't normally watch a comic-based TV show into the comics. Maybe it's going to attract an entirely new segment of fans who don't know anything about Sandman but become new fans and go to the bookstores and find the trade paperbacks and fall in love with the show the way we did back in the 90s. That's my dream. That's my dream for the Sandman. So I'm going to be reacting to this show no matter what. I'm really excited to get into it. It premieres next Friday, so I will be getting my reaction to that first episode out as quickly as possible, and I'll be putting out future reactions every Tuesday and Friday after that until the run is done. I'm really eager to jump into it. I hope you guys are too. If you're interested, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss my reaction next week. And until then, everybody, take care, stay healthy, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.